December 17th, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow drifted sideways through the pines, the flakes catching faint glints of moonlight as they fell. The forest was deathly silent except for the low rumble of truck engines idling under blackout covers. Headlights were forbidden. Even a flicker of light could give them away. Lieutenant Robert Bobby Hayes, a 24-year-old logistics officer from Ohio, crouched over the hood of a Jeep, map spread flat beneath a red-filtered flashlight. His breath came in visible puffs as he traced the thin road leading east, a route that cut straight through territory now crawling with German forces. The Battle of the Bulge had erupted less than 48 hours earlier. American lines were shattered. German armoured divisions, wearing captured US uniforms, had already seized crossroads, blown bridges, and sown chaos. Every road seemed enemy-held. Yet the 3rd Armoured Supply Column, 40 trucks loaded with ammunition, fuel, and winter gear, had to move, or an entire division would freeze and starve behind Bastogne. Colonel James Keating's voice came low and steady through the cold air. "Lieutenant, your convoy leaves in 5 minutes. No lights, no radios, no stops. You missed the turn at Trois Ponts. You're gone." Hayes nodded, glancing down the line of vehicles, engines humming softly, silhouettes barely visible through the snow. Drivers sat tensely behind the wheels, some smoking their last cigarette before rolling into darkness. In his journal that night, Hayes would later write, "It felt like driving into the belly of the war. No light, no sound, just the engines and the snow. Every shadow looked like a German." At 2300 hours, he gave the signal. Engines revved, and the ghost convoy began to move. The forest swallowed them whole, 40 trucks, headlights off, navigating by compass and instinct. Somewhere out there, less than 2 miles ahead, a German panzer column was also on the move. But the Americans had a secret advantage, and it wasn't luck. Hidden beneath the canvas of the lead truck sat a captured German radio beacon transmitter, recently salvaged from a wrecked Luftwaffe vehicle. Hayes had no orders to use it. In fact, using enemy tech was forbidden. But tonight he intended to use it to broadcast false signals, to trick the Germans into believing they were one of their own. Snow whipped into his face as he leaned out the Jeep window, gripping the wheel. "Ghost convoy, this is lead 1, he whispered into his field phone. "No lights, no horns. Keep formation. We're not here to fight, we're here to disappear." Behind him, the trucks crept through the dark like shadows on snow, engines muted, their tires barely crunching. They were entering enemy lines. The snow fell heavier now, thick enough to muffle every sound but the low groan of engines. The convoy wound its way through the narrow, forested road like a dark river moving through a white world. In the passenger seat of the lead Jeep, Sergeant William "Mac" McAllister kept his Thompson resting across his knees. His eyes darted to every movement along the road's edge, broken branches, flickering shadows, the glint of something metallic buried in snow. They'd been told German infiltrators were wearing stolen American uniforms. Hayes couldn't tell friend from foe anymore. "Sir," Mac whispered, "you think this transmitter's really going to fool 'em?" Hayes didn't look up from the compass. "It doesn't have to fool them for long," he said quietly. "Just long enough to get us through." Every few minutes, Hayes adjusted the transmitter, tuning it to frequencies used by German field patrols. The static-filled hum echoed softly in the cab. To any German unit listening nearby, it would sound like a column of friendly supply trucks heading east. The trick worked better than he could have imagined. At 0045, they approached a fork in the road near Trois Ponts, a key junction already reported lost to the enemy. The convoy halted. Up ahead, faint lights flickered between the trees. Through binoculars, Hayes could make out a German checkpoint. 2 trucks, a machine gun nest, and men in long coats stamping their boots against the cold. One stepped into the road, holding a signal lamp. "Christ," Mac muttered. "They'll spot us." But Hayes had another idea. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a captured Wehrmacht flag, taken from a dead convoy days earlier. Without a word, he climbed onto the jeep's hood and tied it to the radio antenna. "Sir, you're insane," Mac hissed. "Maybe," Hayes said, "but if we slow down, we die." He flicked the German beacon to transmit, pressed the pedal and rolled forward. The convoy followed, headlights still dark, engines humming low. The German sentry waved his lamp twice, signalling them to halt. Hayes held his breath, saluted with his gloved hand, and shouted over the wind, "Nachschubkolonne aus Malmedy!" Supply column from Malmedy. The sentry hesitated, shouted something back, too muffled to hear. Then, astonishingly, he waved them through. Truck after truck rolled past, snow glinting faintly off steel helmets. The Germans didn't fire a shot. As the last vehicle cleared the roadblock, Mac exhaled shakily. "Lieutenant." They bought it. Hayes glanced in the mirror, watching the checkpoint fade into fog. "Then let's keep them believing," he said. They'd just crossed the front line, into the heart of enemy territory. The road narrowed to a frozen ribbon twisting through dense pine forest. Every tree looked the same, every shadow a potential ambush. The wind hissed through branches heavy with snow, masking the convoy's engines as they crawled deeper into occupied ground. Lieutenant Hayes checked his wristwatch, 2:10 hours. They were 20 miles past the American line, moving blind through a storm with no map accurate enough to trust. The captured radio beacon hummed softly in the back of the jeep, its dial glowing red. Every half hour, Hayes changed its frequency slightly to mimic German logistics chatter. Somewhere ahead, actual Wehrmacht convoys were also moving through the night. In the back of the third truck, Private Raymond Kwan, a mechanic from San Francisco, whispered to the driver, "Feels like we're driving through hell with the lights off." The driver, teeth chattering, replied, "As long as we don't wake the devil." Their luck held for another 10 miles. Then, out of the fog, headlights, real headlights, appeared on the road ahead. Hayes's heart froze. He signaled with his fist, "Halt!" The trucks squealed softly as they stopped, engines idling low. Out of the darkness came the rumble of heavy engines, half-tracks. German half-tracks, moving straight toward them. "Kill the engines," Hayes whispered into the field phone. The entire convoy went dark, silent. Only the snow moved. Then, from the glow of the German headlights, silhouettes emerged, helmets, rifles, insignia gleaming. Hayes's gut clenched. They were Waffen-SS. The half-tracks slowed as they approached the first American truck. For a long second, Hayes thought it was over. Then, through the swirling snow, came a shouted command in German, angry, impatient. Hayes couldn't understand it all, but one phrase was clear. "Keep moving. Schnell." The German column wasn't stopping. They were ordering Hayes's trucks forward, assuming they were part of their own supply chain. Mac stared at him wide-eyed. "They think we're one of them." "Then we don't correct them," Hayes said quietly. "Let's ghost through." Truck by truck, the two convoys passed within yards of each other. Americans and Germans brushing shoulders in the blizzard, separated only by darkness and luck. A German soldier lit a cigarette, the flame reflecting briefly on his face as Hayes's jeep rolled by. When the last vehicle passed, Hayes finally exhaled. His hand trembled on the wheel. Behind them, the German engines faded back into the night. They had just driven through an entire SS column, unseen, untouched. The convoy pressed on, the forest stretching endlessly before them, but Hayes knew their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The bridge at Stavelot, the only crossing left standing, was rumoured to be rigged with explosives. If they didn't make it across before dawn, the ghost convoy would vanish into history for good. The convoy emerged from the forest onto open ground, the sky now a dull grey from the approaching dawn. The snow had slowed, but the cold had hardened into something cruel. Every breath burned, every finger ached inside frozen gloves. In the distance, a faint silhouette cut across the valley, a narrow bridge spanning the Amblève River. The road signs were gone, shot to splinters, but Hayes knew from his map that this had to be Stavelot Bridge, the only one left intact for miles. Sergeant Mack squinted through his binoculars. "Sir, that's a German flag up there." Hayes adjusted his scope. He saw movement, figures, a few vehicles, sandbags, and the glint of machine guns. "Checkpoint," he muttered. "They're guarding the bridge." Behind him, 40 trucks idled quietly on the frozen road, invisible under their snow-dusted tarps. Hayes could feel every man's nerves hanging by a thread. They'd come too far to turn back. He ducked into the jeep and keyed the transmitter again. The captured German beacon crackled to life. He tuned it to a Wehrmacht engineering channel and began transmitting a short-looped signal he'd recorded earlier. "Bridge secure. Supply column approaching. Stand by for passage." Static filled the air. The signal would carry just enough authority if the Germans on the bridge were listening. Hayes grabbed the field phone. "Convoy, listen up. We go one truck at a time. No noise, no lights. If they open fire, scatter and burn what you can. We're not giving them the cargo." Mack looked at him. "And if they don't open fire?" Hayes gave a tired smile. "Then we're ghosts for one more mile." The first truck rolled forward. Its engine growled low as it approached the bridge, tires crunching over ice. Every man held his breath. Then, a whistle. A German voice shouted from the outpost. Soldiers stepped out with rifles raised. Hayes's stomach turned. This is it. But instead of shooting, one German waved a lamp, signalling clearance. They'd heard the radio transmission. Truck after truck followed. Headlights dark, snow swirling like smoke around their wheels. The German guards barely looked up. One even saluted as Hayes's jeep crossed the bridge. Halfway across, the wind cut hard through the valley. The ice on the planks creaked under the weight of the vehicles. Hayes glanced over the railing. Black water flowed beneath, shards of ice drifting silently downstream. By the time the last truck reached the far bank, the eastern horizon had begun to glow faintly with dawn. The convoy had made it across. Mack let out a laugh, dry, disbelieving. "We just rolled through their front yard." Hayes only nodded, eyes still on the mirror. "Keep rolling. Ghosts don't celebrate." As the convoy disappeared over the ridge toward Allied lines, behind them came a distant rumble, an explosion. The Germans had just blown the bridge. Had they been 5 minutes slower, the entire column would have been lost. But tonight, history would record nothing. No official report, no photograph, no recognition. Just a rumour whispered among soldiers about a convoy that vanished into enemy lines and came out the other side without losing a single man. December 18th, 1944. The first light of morning broke weakly over the hills. The storm had stopped, leaving the world washed in silver and silence. The ghost convoy was finally clear of German lines, but Hayes refused to slow down. They'd cheated death too many times to stop before daylight. The trucks snaked through open farmland now, engine noise carrying freely in the thin air. Burned-out vehicles and frozen bodies marked the path of yesterday's fighting, grim reminders of what happened to those who hadn't been so lucky. Sergeant Mack stared out the window, the first warmth of dawn reflecting in his tired eyes. "You think anyone's going to believe this, Lieutenant?" Hayes gave a half-smile. "I'm not sure I do." A mile later, the convoy crested a ridge. Below them, through the rising mist, they saw it. The faded stars and stripes flying above an American field command post. Someone shouted from a guard tower, and within seconds, soldiers were pouring out from tents, waving frantically. "Holy hell," Max said. "We made it home." When the first truck rolled into the perimeter, officers ran out to meet them. A colonel, face blackened with soot, shouted over the noise, "Where the hell did you come from?" "Enemy lines," Hayes replied, stepping out of his jeep. "We brought your ammunition." The colonel stared at him for a long moment, then let out a stunned laugh. "You crossed through German armour?" Hayes nodded. "We didn't cross through them, sir." We drove with them. Word of the ghost convoy spread fast. Soldiers came from nearby units just to look at the line of mud-caked trucks and the flag still flying from Hayes's antenna, the same Wehrmacht banner that had fooled the Germans at Trois Ponts. One mechanic examined a bullet hole in a fender and shook his head. "That's the luckiest convoy I've ever seen." Another soldier muttered, "That ain't luck." "That's divine intervention." But Hayes didn't feel lucky. He stood apart from the laughter and cheers, staring back toward the forest they'd just escaped. Snow still fell faintly there, the trees hiding the ghosts of the men they'd slipped past. He knew the truth. Their survival wasn't divine or miraculous. It had been a gamble, calculated and desperate. And though they'd come out alive, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they'd left something behind in that fog. He reached into his coat and switched off the German radio beacon for the last time. The soft hum that had guided them through the night faded into silence. For a moment, the world felt completely still. In his report later that day, Hayes would write only one sentence. "Convoy arrived intact, 0400 hours, no casualties, mission complete. No mention of the German checkpoint, no mention of the half-tracks, no mention of the bridge that exploded minutes after they crossed. Just a single line, because ghosts, after all, leave no footprints. The snow had turned the Ardennes into a graveyard of silence. Trucks sat half-buried near the supply depots, their engines still ticking from cold metal. Inside a canvas command tent, Lieutenant Hayes stood before a table of senior officers, his uniform stiff with frost, eyes hollow from 2 sleepless nights. A major read through his typed report, frowning. "You're telling me 40 trucks passed through enemy lines, through SS territory without a single shot fired?" "Yes, sir," Hayes said simply. "Impossible," another officer muttered. "Our intelligence maps show that entire sector crawling with armor." Hayes glanced down at his gloved hands. "That's correct, sir." "We saw them." A long silence followed. The major finally folded the report. "I appreciate your creativity, Lieutenant, but we can't file this." "You understand?" Hayes looked up slowly. "With respect, sir, every man here deserves to live," the major interrupted, "and you got them through. But this will cause questions we can't answer. You used enemy communications equipment, falsified signals," he sighed. "You broke 6 wartime regulations. The story dies here." The words hit like a cold wind. Hayes nodded once. "Understood." He saluted, turned, and walked out into the snow. Outside, Sergeant Mack waited by the jeep, steam rising from the hood. "How'd it go?" Hayes managed a small smile. We're ghosts again. The men of the convoy were quietly reassigned, dispersed among other transport units. No medals, no citations, not even an official record of the mission. To the army, it had never happened. Yet in the weeks that followed, word spread through the frozen front lines, whispered around campfires and passed between mess tents. A story about a convoy that moved unseen through German lines. A story about men who became shadows, who carried salvation in silence. By January, the Battle of the Bulge began to turn. Supplies reached the front, the siege at Bastogne held, and the tide shifted once more in the Allies' favour. In an anonymous dispatch, one journalist wrote, "Some say supplies arrived when none should have, that a convoy came out of the snow like an apparition and vanished the same night. No one saw it come, but everyone saw its results." When Hayes read those words weeks later, he smiled faintly. Maybe that was enough? He leaned back against his truck, snow melting on his collar, and watched the horizon. The war was still raging, but somewhere behind that fog he could almost hear the whisper of engines, the sound of ghosts driving through eternity.